In the heart of London, where skyscrapers rise and history merges with modernity, there is one place that does not change: Buckingham Palace. This is where James Storm Williams, a royal guardsman, is on duty, steadfast and disciplined. But today he will face a new challenge. Mike "Thunderstorm" Harris is a street fighting champion who doesn't believe in discipline or respect for tradition. He has gained a reputation in London for his enormous strength and brutality. And now, when he sees a calm guardsman, he decides to test whether discipline can actually withstand such force. The street fighter, who is used to violence and fear, is up against the resilience and calmness that James personifies. What happens when these two forces meet? The sun was slowly sinking below the horizon as James Storm Williams stood at his post in front of Buckingham Palace. All his movements were precise and disciplined, every element of his uniform flawless. His appearance radiated strength and calmness, and his unshakable posture and ruthless discipline were his only weapons. He was invisible in the crowd, but his presence was as powerful as the palace itself. It was his daily reality to stand guard and protect the country's historical heritage, not allowing any provocation to break him. He was a guardsman, and that meant more than just a uniform or a weapon in his hands. It was a mission, and James knew better than anyone what it meant to be dedicated to his duties. But today everything would change. A man approached the palace who seemed to be a complete stranger to this holy place. Mike "Thunderstorm" Harris, whose fame spread throughout the underground fighting arenas of London, moved down the street with such confidence that people immediately parted ways, not wanting to get in the way of this walking force. Mike was big, strong, with shoulders like a boxer, and looked like he could wipe out any resistance in his path. His t-shirt was tight to his muscles, and his face was wrinkled from the habit of fighting and brutal action. His look of defiance left no room for doubt. He was sure he could break anyone. And here, in the heart of Buckingham Palace, he came across a royal guardsman whom he decided to test. "Well, what do we have here?" His voice was low and rough, like a warning. "Why are you standing there like a doll? Look at me. I'm not afraid of anything. You're not even capable of taking a step, are you?" The crowd around him quieted down as people began to notice Mike, with all his weight and aggression, approaching the guard. Would he break? Would he show his weakness? Each of the tourists, and even the locals, felt the pressure of the situation growing. James did not move. His gaze was cold and unwavering. He felt provoked, but he did not let it affect him. As a guardsman, he knew one thing: stand. His mission was clear. He was here to protect this place, and no one could force him to change his position. But Mike couldn't seem to let go of it. "Can you hear me?" Mike challenged, moving even closer, hoping to see at least some reaction. "This is just a show, not a real fight. Do you hear me, or are you not capable of more?" But James did not respond. His expression remained unchanged. Step by step, Mike was right in front of him, and, with a move, grabbed the guardsman's arm. He was sure that his strength would break the stone. "Well, now will you show me what you can do? Come on." Mike tried to pull his hand out of James, but the guardsman just shifted his arm easily, almost effortlessly, not allowing Mike to take control. And it was at that moment that everything changed. Mike stood in front of the guard, and his heart was beating faster. He thought he was immortal, strong, crushing everything in his path. But here, in front of this wall of discipline, he felt the first signs of doubt. Entering the arena where he had always been king was natural for him. But here, in the shadow of Buckingham Palace, everything looked different. James, without even moving, seemed as unshakable as a stone monument. And this only fueled Mike's aggression. "Well, soldier." Mike started provoking again. "Didn't you hear me? Stand there like a statue if you want, but I'm not going to let you pass by without putting your pride on the ground." Mike moved even closer, literally right up against James, and made a sudden movement, grabbing his arm. He had no doubt that he was about to break his resistance. His fingers tightly gripped the guardsman's arm and felt strong. He had a feeling that this weakling, this uniformed man, would be on his knees in a moment. He had already imagined how James would be overthrown, how all the tourists would see his victory, and he would have another great victory over the system. But it didn't happen that way. Mike felt his aggression met with an unbreakable pillar of discipline. Instead of feeling the usual weakness in James' arm, he suddenly realized that his own arm began to feel pressure, and not just any pressure, but with a precision that seemed almost irresistible. James didn't give in, didn't move, but his movements became so fast and precise that Mike began to feel his grip losing control. His thoughts were confused. Only now he realized that this man was not just standing at his post, he was withstanding every challenge. But why? "Leave me alone." Mike exclaimed, trying to pull his arm away, but the guard only tightened his grip, as if it were a simple holding technique, not a struggle for dominance. "I'm not changing my seat, Mike," James said, his voice calm, as if this were a normal conversation and not a collision of two worlds. "You want to know what power is? I'll show you." At the same moment, with ease, James turned Mike's arm in such a way that he felt all his aggression turn into vulnerability, unable to resist. Mike tried to push him with force, but it was useless. James' movements were so precise that they seemed mechanical, like those of an experienced fighter, not just a bodyguard. "Are you a real martial artist?" James asked ironically, not changing his tone, although everyone around him began to feel that this situation had already become inevitable for Mike. "No, not a fight, but a struggle for control. You don't understand that strength is not the strength of the arm. It's the power of the tongue, the power of patience, and, most importantly, the power to maintain control in the most difficult situations." Mike could feel his body disobeying James' will. He struggled and thrashed around like a caged animal trying to get out, but every movement only strengthened the control the guard exerted. It was as if everything he did only further confirmed one thing. James was not just a guard, he was a warrior trained to perfection. "This isn't your arena, Mike," James said, shifting Mike's arm position once again, thus depriving him of his ability to strike. "Your strength doesn't work here. It's all about discipline and precision." Mike, outraged and angry, was still trying to understand what was happening. He felt powerless, and this feeling was new to him. He was used to being the center of attention, his strength making people retreat, but now everything was different. He tried to break free of James' grip, using all his strength, but the guard was unbreakable. His control remained absolute. "You can't even break this post, can you?" Mike laughed out loud, though his laughter already sounded like panic. "You're just stuck here like a puppet. You don't even know how much it hurts to be hit." But James didn't answer. He wasn't here to respond with words. He just kept holding Mike down. And at that moment, everyone watching realized that the strength they thought was important didn't matter at all when you were up against someone who knew how to control it. Mike felt destroyed. His huge body, which had never stopped in front of any opponent before, was now powerless in the face of this perfectly precise grip of the guardsman. He could not free his arm. Every movement only made the situation worse, and with every attempt he felt his former confidence melting away like snow under the summer sun. "What? You don't have enough strength, Thunderstorm?" James spoke again, and his voice wasn't angry or aggressive. He was calm, even almost indifferent. This was even more humiliating for Mike. What could be worse than feeling like your strength doesn't matter? All the tourists watching this scene realized that this conflict was now turning into something more than just a competition between two men. They stood there with bated breath, realizing that they were witnessing a lesson that true strength is not defined by size or muscle. It is the ability to stay calm even when the whole world is trying to break you. "Don't you get it yet, Mike?" James added quietly, not changing his position. "It's not about breaking people down. It's about keeping the situation under control. Street fighting is just a game for you. But I'm not here to play." Mike jerked once more, but this time he felt the pain in his shoulder intensify. James increased the pressure, and his hands acted with such precision that Mike could not get a single counter move out. He found himself in a situation where he was completely powerless, and it was his first real realization that strength does not always solve everything. The feeling of helplessness penetrated his mind. How did this happen? How could this guy, without losing a single drop of sweat, control him as if he were just a puppet in his hands? "It's not just strength, it's control, Mike. That's where you're wrong." James, as if realizing that Mike had begun to realize the depths of his situation, said calmly again, "You're not in control. You are only giving yourself over to your aggression. But true strength is not violence, but the ability to keep your balance even in the most difficult moments." Mike tried to free his arm, but his movements no longer had the confidence he had before. He realized that he had lost. Not physically, but morally. All these years he had built his reputation on fear, on strength, on the ability to fight without any rules. But this was a different arena. And now he was standing in front of a guard who was in his place not because he had strength, but because he had principles. "What do you want me to do with you?" James turned to Mike again, holding his arm in a perfect hold. "Do you want me to let you go, and you want to go on with this show? Or maybe we can end it here, you know?" Mike felt his pride begin to crumble to pieces. He could no longer deny what had become obvious. He was not just a guard, but a real warrior who knew when to attack and when to stay calm. The tourists around him began whispering to each other, exchanging glances as Mike, finally losing his usual war animal appearance, began to lower his head. He tried to maintain his self-respect, but his plans were slipping away like sand through his fingers. And so, when everyone thought he had completely broken down, Mike finally admitted defeat. His attempts to get out of this situation were ending helplessly. James didn't move. His precise control was still in place, and every move Mike made only reinforced this feeling. The control was no longer Mike's, but James'. Street rudeness didn't matter in front of skill. "Do you think you've got it?" James finally asked, gently releasing his hand. Mike could not answer. His heart was heavy with defeat, and his pride kept him silent. This was not just a fight, it was a lesson he would remember forever. A battle is not always decided by physical blows. Sometimes it is determined by how you are able to hold yourself together. Mike was on his knees, his shoulder aching from the pressure, but it wasn't as important as the pain in his soul. He, this titled fighter, felt powerless. Only now he realized that his strength was nothing compared to what was in front of him. He, the master of street fights, the one who was used to getting what he wanted by force, brutality, and cruelty, was now just a small part of this picture. All these years Mike had perceived himself as invincible, as a man who could break any system. But this time the system was different. It was rooted in discipline, calm, and clear rules. You street fighters always think that winning a fight is about strength. But it's not about that, Mike. It's about control, James said, feeling the tension finally ease. He didn't change his stance, didn't throw any punches, didn't make any unnecessary movements. He just stood there, not trying to throw Mike off balance, but helping him realize where he was going wrong again. Mike lowered his head, and James let go of his arm, giving him the opportunity to get up. He took his time. There was no need for quick gestures. Mike had lost his pride, but he still didn't know how to get out of this situation. There were no more words between them. The silence was broken only by the distant footsteps of the police approaching the scene. Everything was coming to an end. The tourists, who had been filming the scenes with Mike and the guardsman just a few minutes earlier, were now silently watching the situation quickly resolve itself. And even when Mike was detained by the police and his threats and shouting had no effect, James remained standing at his post, returning to his mission as if nothing had happened. "You don't even know who you are to stand there like that." Mike shouted again, trying to make a last-ditch effort to maintain his mask of invincibility, even in the hands of the police. His voice was loud, but it didn't matter. Everyone around him could see how weak he had become. James just looked at him, but this time he didn't say a word. He didn't need those words. His calmness was all that was needed for Mike to realize his defeat. The police, who had already come closer, quickly took control of Mike and escorted him out of the palace. His threats and calls for retribution rang out in the air, but they quickly faded away as he was dragged into a car. All that remained was the silence that almost instantly filled the palace courtyard after everything that had happened. James didn't look at Mike anymore. He returned to his post as if nothing had happened. His posture was completely calm. Everyone around him was already leaving only a moment when the guardsman, without a single movement, was able to show what real strength was. It was not power, not fists. It was discipline. It was a willingness to stand your ground even when they try to break you. The remaining spectators whispered among themselves, analyzing the events that had just unfolded. They talked about the courage and strength that comes not from those who can hit, but from those who can remain unchanged in the most difficult situations. James remained steadfast, without a single worry in his eyes. Those who understood the lesson quietly left the scene, realizing that they had witnessed more than just a conflict. They had witnessed what it means to be strong. Now, as the police led Mike to the car, James straightened his uniform, checked to make sure his hat hadn't moved, and turned his gaze forward. He stood at his post, as he always did, ready for any challenge. The palace in this moment belonged to him, and now, even a few minutes after the incident, he did not change his steadfastness. At the end of it all, when the police had already taken Mike away, James stood calmly, silently. His position did not change. He stood, not because of strength or cruelty, but because of his ability to remain calm and steady in any situation. And from that moment on, it was more than just his post. It was a lesson that Mike and everyone who witnessed the event will never forget. True strength is not about hitting or destroying, but about having control and the ability to be unflappable even under the highest pressure.